Hi, thank you very much. My name is Zoe Cormier, pronounced correctly. So we're going to be talking about synthetic versus natural forms of psilocybin. So I have been writing about psychedelics for 10 years. I am the only person in this audience who can say, Rolling Stone paid me to drop acid. Absolutely true. So I was hoping that I was going to get a bunch of vacuous tech bros who were going to be marketing some new analog of psilocybin that does nothing. Unfortunately, I got some gentlemen who actually are doing things that I actually respect, which is not what I wanted. I was hoping to be a massive pain in the bum, but I'm going to actually have to be pretty polite because I think actually their work is actually pretty considerable. So please welcome Benjamin Lightburn from Filament Health, Colin Keating from MindBio Therapeutics. Put up your hand. And Chris Koddermann, am I saying that correctly, or is it Koddermann?
Koddermann's fine.
Koddermann's fine, from the International Therapeutic Psilocybin Rescheduling Initiative. Please come ahead. Right. Can you hear me? Right. So I've been writing about psychedelics for about 10 years, and 10 years ago, what I wrote about was the science. I wrote about new studies, the dream of bringing these drugs back into mainstream medicine, and now, every day, I get maybe 12 press releases from some new startup. Hey, Zoe, have you heard of psychedelic therapy? Would you like to hear about new analog? Would you like to look at our patent portfolio? I'm like, no, I don't want to look at your patent portfolio. So Ben, tell me why you're working with natural psilocybin and what that means.
So the primary reason why we work with natural psilocybin and all natural substances is, frankly, because we already know that they work, right? Given the burning urgency of the mental health crisis, we think it makes much more sense to work with substances that have a demonstrated history of safety and maybe not efficacy in the traditional sense, but some kind of prior use in humans. This allows those substances to get into clinical trials quicker and therefore be administered to people quicker and hopefully get approved quicker. And that's really the primary reason.
So you have one of the first licenses with Health Canada, right?
We do, yeah. So we have a license from Health Canada, which permits us to manufacture psilocybin, psilocin, all the controlled natural psychedelic substances. Our facility is also GMP compliant, so that means we can make drug candidates and other things for actual human consumption, as well as provide substances through the Special Access Program, which is a way for Canadians to apply on an emergency basis for experimental therapies. Access to restricted drugs was prohibited until January of this year, but Health Canada in their munificence has since allowed us to now apply for psilocybin and MDMA therapy through the Special Access Program.
I enjoy your use of the word munificence.
Hopefully I used it correctly.
You did. We spoke about this the other day. A lot of people around the world think that Canada is doing an amazing job with the Special Access Program, but we spoke about this the other day. In what ways is Canada actually not doing a very good job? So talk me through what the bureaucrats are failing to do.
Well, they're still the ones that hold the pen on scheduling the substances, right? So, as much as we want to give them credit for being, I guess, relatively progressive in a global sense, they're the ones who are maintaining the status quo, as Crispin said, like, what's the evidence in support of the current system? We've been through an unimaginable mountain of red tape to be able to manufacture controlled substances, turn them into drug candidates, get them into clinical trials. Each one of these things comes with an enormous burden, and it ironically, now that we've been through the burden, it's actually to our advantage that the burden stays in place. But it is a little bit nonsensical, especially when in Vancouver, the bastion of hippies and aging hippies, you can go to a store and buy magic mushrooms openly advertised, right? And it's good, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But it's sort of frustrating to do sort of legitimate research that you have to jump through just an unbelievable mountain of hurdles.
Indeed, it strikes me that there is an enormous hurdle that we have to cross so California, decriminalizing, Oakland, Denver. in Holland, you can do them recreationally, but you can't do them for therapy. And in Canada, you can do it for therapy if you are dying of cancer, but you can't nationally do them for recreational purposes. It seems to me like bureaucrats don't really know what they're doing with psychedelics. Chris, do you want to chime in?
Well, I mean, I think, in a lot of countries, it's obviously driven by their international obligations, which aren't entirely straightforward. So under the 1971 Convention on Psychotropic Substances, psilocybin and psilocin are both Schedule 1. Mushrooms aren't mentioned. Some countries interpret it as including mushrooms, others don't. I think the majority do, but once you process it, you extract it, or you produce synthetic, then obviously it's captured by the treaty. And so that treaty drives the obligations of the 184 parties, state parties to the treaty, in terms of the domestic controls they have to put in place. And the controls around Schedule 1 are completely different than the controls around Schedules 2 through 4, and are based on a notion from when the treaty was negotiated that these drugs are of little therapeutic benefit, if any, and are an especially serious risk to public health. And we obviously know that's not the case. And the organization I co-founded is trying to do something about that in terms of getting psilocybin out of Schedule 1, so that we can bring down some of these barriers to research that Crispin so articulately spoke about a couple minutes ago.
What is the biggest barrier to getting it removed from Schedule 1?
I think it's the first step in the process. So there's essentially, you need to get a review initiated. The WHO Expert Committee on Drug Dependence then does a medical and scientific assessment looking at therapeutic value, abuse liability, and then there's a vote at the UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs. So you need to get a review initiated. I won't go through the various pathways. There's several. Presuming you can get it initiated, I think it's going to be difficult for the WHO Expert Committee on Drug Dependence to come up with anything other than a recommendation that it should be out of Schedule 1, because it simply doesn't fit the criteria. And then, of course, you've got to get it through the UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs, which is a political body and doesn't do very reasonable things on scheduling decisions at times, although they have done some reasonable things in terms of pushing back.
What have they done that's been reasonable?
Well, China tried to push to get ketamine scheduled internationally, which the WHO pushed back on, and they clearly couldn't line up support for at the UNCND, so the Chinese, after several attempts, gave up on getting ketamine scheduled, which was obviously very important in terms of the role it plays medically in many low and middle income countries.
Sure. Colin, do you want to talk about the situation in Australia?
Yeah, I think you're being generous to the bureaucrats, saying that
That's
they don't know
unusual that anyone would ever say that.
they don't know how to handle the scheduling situation, because I think they don't know how to handle the broad mental health landscape, full stop. And that sums up Australia. I think if you look at the challenges we face in Australia at the moment, and I could sit here and talk about stats for hours, but I think the one damning one at the moment is the leading cause of death in youth between the age of 15 and 24 is suicide. And
in the Sunshine's Nation.
And for our Indigenous community, it's 3 times that number. So, I think we can talk about scheduling of substances for hours, but our view is that we've got to be impactful across the board. We love what the New Zealand government brings for us in terms of our research that's domiciled there. We can actually, our patients in our cohorts can have their microdoses of LSD delivered to their home, and they can administer the doses in their lounge room, their kitchen. It's quite extraordinary in terms of the progressive nature of the legislation there from a research perspective. But I think we can't lose sight of the reason we're all here and sitting in this room and sitting at events all around the world is that we're trying to find better outcomes for sufferers from mental health overall. And whether that comes through psychedelic substances, through digital platforms, through new therapy services, or any other mechanism, that should be the ultimate goal we can't lose sight of.
Mm-hmm. So you and I spoke yesterday about Indigenous rights, which is not, it's difficult to bring up because a lot of people in the tech community kind of roll their eyes and it sounds very hippy-dippy, but it does deserve some discussion. What would you like to say about it?
Yeah, and I think Ben might have a view on this, given that you deal more so with natural psychedelics than we do, given our program is based on LSD. But I think there's got to be a consideration for sustainable management of the natural psychedelics. And given that, and we've heard today from Keith and Rory, how interwoven these natural substances are to the fabric of these Indigenous communities. We've got to be conscious of how that's managed from a commercial perspective going forward. So, I think that's got to be a topic of conversation as well.
In terms of how it would be managed from a commercial perspective, I mean, are you talking about royalties being paid, or?
That's a complex conversation. I think first and foremost is just the sustainability of the crops themselves. That's
Sure.
That's a critical factor. Royalties. There's a minefield that we need to get through to ensure that we're recognising the importance of that relationship with Indigenous communities.
Fair. So let's go into a minefield. So you mentioned sustainability, and so you said that MindBio have been very conservative in their patent applications. Let's talk about that for a bit, because it's something that a lot of people are thinking about, and there are a lot of people in this room who know that there are a lot of big players in this industry who have made some very broad patent applications that very well may be the undoing of their companies. Which of you would like to start? I spoke to my lawyer. I put this through. I know I won't get sued.
I might just, given it's fresh in my mind from our conversation yesterday, you were quite intimidating at the start, I must say.
I'm half your age. Jesus.
I don't think you are, actually.
Wait. My job title is journalist, okay? My job title is not publicist, and my job title is not supplicant. It is my job to ask you difficult questions. Talk to me about patents.
We spoke about it yesterday. We've taken a very conservative and deliberate approach to establishing the business and taking it forward. Everything we do, our focus is on funding research into both psychedelic substances, primarily LSD and microdosing, but as well as digital platforms as well. Everything we do around our business is on the basis of the evidence-based outcomes of the research. So we need to prove efficacy, we need to understand the profile of the patients in our cohorts and how they respond to substances and so forth. So for us, absolutely, we want to be able to find some patentable assets at some point in time, but the primary driver is, and coming back to my previous comment, is how do we actually find a way to better outcomes for the sufferers of mental health conditions? So we've been very conservative in our approach. We haven't gone out and raised tens of millions of dollars because we've done what we need to do to support the research programs under our banner. Mm-hmm. And we'll progress those opportunities as we see fit when we get the evidence that supports those initiatives.
That makes sense. Ben?
I mean, I guess it's no secret, as you said, that the idea of patents in the psychedelic industry has been quite controversial up till now. I think that's driven because there's a inherent conflict between traditional drug development, which relies on the fact that you can develop a new molecule and patent it in order to provide, sufficient protection to invest the hundreds of millions of dollars to bring a new approved therapy to market. Psychedelic compounds are found in nature and have been known to science for decades and to indigenous communities for millennia, and therefore are unpatentable. So that's where you get a lot of creative approaches, right? Which, I mean, you can repeat them. We maybe don't need to get into all the different approaches.
We totally can.
But what I like to say is oftentimes in the psychedelics industry you might find solutions in search of problems. And often that problem, rather than being an inherent deficit or some problem, is actually the problem of patentability, right? Mm-hmm. So it's something that you're making a new analog or something, and I'm not saying that different novel analogs won't yield therapeutic benefits, but I think until the benefits are proven, I think it's safe to assume that the main benefit is patentability.
So who in this room knows the name Myriad Genetics? Put your hand up. Oh my God, only like really, just one person. Oh my God, I'm gonna school you. All right. Myriad Genetics is an American pharmaceutical firm that tried to patent the genes for BRCA1 and 2, which are genes that facilitate the development of breast cancer. So I don't know how old you guys are, but I'm almost 40, and I remember in 1994...
So he's 80?
All right, 1994.
Time for bed.
In 1994 and 1995, Myriad Genetics tried to patent the genes, right, that facilitated breast cancer. And they used the same arguments that we're hearing today from pharmaceutical firms. We just care about patients. We need to patent it in order to raise funds to make drugs that help you, right? And then a lot of women who had had breast cancer came out and said, excuse me, that's in my body. The Supreme Court in America in 2013 finally struck that down and said, no, you cannot patent a gene in the human body. It took 25 years. 25 years, okay? Are we going to get to the point? So at the moment, the number of patents being filed for new analogs of different psychedelics, right, is growing at an exponential rate. So you work with Carrie Turnbull, right, Freedom to Operate. If you speak to Porta Sofia, who work on documenting all of the knowledge on all of the psychedelics that have been patented, it's growing at an exponential rate. It used to be hundreds, and now it's going to be thousands within 6 months. Are we going to get to the point where there is a Supreme Court decision or some other higher order in Britain or in Canada or some other nation that says, enough, we are tired of you trying to patent new analogs?
I don't think the courts are going to step in. I mean, the courts have been quite clear in terms of the exceptions to patentability, right? So natural phenomena, laws of nature, abstract ideas are off the table. I don't think they're going to add to that list. I think that there have been increasing calls for changes to the patent system overall, not just with respect to pharmaceuticals and not just with respect to psychedelics. I think on the one hand, to the point you made, and I think the point you're trying to make as well, some of these companies are going to fail in their patent strategies. They're going to get a nice investment out of patenting IP that's not valuable over the long term because it's not going to offer any benefit to patients. Others will be awarded patents that may not stand up to scrutiny. Obviously, there's the case of the Compass patents, which are being challenged by Freedom to Operate. Interestingly, the World Intellectual Property Organization back in 2015 recommended to patent examiners that they should consider patent applications on polymorphs as not innovative and shouldn't be awarded. Some countries don't award patents for different polymorphic forms. So we'll see. I mean, over the long term, I think the system needs to change in many ways, but it's not going to necessarily come from the courts. It's going to come from commercial factors or changes in legislation that governments realize that the system doesn't.
Why would it come from commercial factors?
Well, if you're building your commercial strategy on patenting
So
an
the investors are
analog
going to be out for your head.
you're not going to survive long term if you're simply studying analogs and spending money on analogs that don't offer any any efficacy over the long term. I mean, you're not going to be able to get a drug through the FDA phase 3 process. So, where's your business model at that point, right? You raise a bunch of money early on, and then you have nowhere to go.
Correct.
So you've been focusing on clinical trials, right?
Yeah.
So how hard has it been to fund that?
Look, we've been fortunate to have a very secure group of private investors that have supported us through the way. And to be fair, Justin Hanker and Anush Manzuri, who are the founders of the business, have been working with those investors over the last decade in some shape or form with their businesses. But we've got a group that buy into the thesis. Everyone is recognising that we are a business with a purpose, as is all of the other businesses sitting in this room today.
Almost all.
That's your words, not mine. So I think that's been important to bring them on the journey of this is not a short-term money grab from an investment point of view. If you're with us for the long haul. And that's the reality of the sort of the field that we're in terms of researching and discovering the efficacy of what are not new drugs, but sort of new potential opportunities for us to bring to market.
Fair. Ben, do you want to add?
Well, I was just going to say, about the patenting, limitless numbers of analogs. Given that there are an almost unlimited number, a patent on any one of them may or may not be super valuable at the end of the day, unless you can prove good efficacy benefits over the compounds that we already have.
Is it just a fool's errand?
If the efficacy can be demonstrated, no, I don't think it is, for sure. But we think it makes much more sense to start with compounds that we already know work, right? We act kind of as if psilocybin's already approved, right? And as if it already exists as a medicine, but it doesn't, right? We need to get that one approved first before we make analog XYZ, in our view.
So you and I spoke about Thomas Hartle. So who here knows the name Thomas Hartle? So he's the first Canadian who was given the approval to have psilocybin for his terminal bowel cancer. So he just grew the mushrooms in his basement. As he put it to me, he said, why am I going to buy some crap off the dark web that could just be shiitake laced with fentanyl, or wait forever to get GMP psilocybin? Yeah. So he just grew it himself. So if growing mushrooms himself is good enough for a guy who's dying of bowel cancer, why are regular mushrooms not good enough for everyday folk?
For the simple fact in that in magic mushrooms, the quantity of psilocybin is not standardized, and in fact can be highly variable. We see even within the same flush of mushrooms that the psilocybin content can vary by as much as 4 or 5 times. And while that may not be an insurmountable hurdle for some, right? You could taste or try some mushrooms and get an idea of how strong it is. That's a really inaccurate way of judging the potency for what are really powerful substances, right? So I would humbly suggest to Thomas Hartle that, and by the way, he has since taken synthetic standardized GMP psilocybin.
Oh yeah.
So I would suggest that the little bit of extra technology that we can add to the mushrooms, which already do most of the work. But what we can provide with our technology is ability to standardize the dose, yet also include all of the secondary minor compounds from the magic mushroom, so that if you believe in the entourage effect, you can benefit from it.
What was his experience in terms of he's used both natural and synthetic?
It's a good question. You'd have to ask him.
Good enough for him to lobby for others to have the same right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, for someone dying of cancer, that they feel that their last effort should be to lobby for other people to have the right to this substance, that says a lot,
Yep.
I think.
Yeah, so he originally applied with Therasil, which is a Canadian advocacy organization. Originally in Canada, you had to apply for what was called a Section 56 exemption. This was a ministerial letter that allowed you to consume psilocybin for your own medical treatment, but it interestingly didn't actually say where you could get your psilocybin from.
They also make no distinction between psilocybin and mushrooms?
No. So they do now, actually. So Health Canada, and we don't want to make this too of a Canadian-focused discussion, even though we're mostly Canadian. But back in those days, yeah, and even on the Government of Canada website, they don't make a distinction between psilocybin and magic mushrooms. Now they do. In fact, now on Friday they issued a notice to stakeholders. They actually distinguish between magic mushrooms, purified extracts, and synthetic psilocybin. So they're learning.
How much time have we got? 5 minutes. Do you got
15.
We've got 15. Just trying to think, there's so much that we've spoken about. Do you guys want to talk about the entourage effect, the fabled entourage effect?
Sure, well, we can define it. The entourage effect, as it is colloquially known, is this idea that many different compounds present naturally in magic mushrooms or any other species of plants like cannabinoids or whatever, that this entourage of different compounds may have synergistic effects when you consume them all together, over and above the effects that you might experience from getting just purified or synthesized psilocybin. Different people report that by consuming different varieties of mushrooms that they have different effects, right? So this one, it's known to make you yawn, or it's known to make you laugh or be social, and those might just be due to expectation bias. We don't know if those effects are real, but it does seem as though they might be real. The key is to actually get more evidence, and until you actually make a natural extract that includes all the secondary metabolites and put that extract into a clinical trial where you can get a more objective measure of the effects, we won't know, but we think it's very important to try. So
who's trying? Like, who's actually doing studies on the other compounds in mushrooms? So, for example, I'm sure a lot of you are aware that ayahuasca contains MAOI that inhibits the a digestion of certain compounds, right? So it
DMT.
prolongs the experience of DMT. I didn't know until last week that there's a number of mushrooms that actually contain that.
Yeah, they do. It's the monoamine oxidase inhibitors, which are different compounds which prevent the monoamine oxidase, which is an enzyme that breaks down the tryptamine alkaloids, in particular DMT. So that is one of the things that we think could affect the consumption of psilocybin naturally through an extract, because those compounds would be present in the final product along with the psilocybin.
Alex Sherwood at UConn is doing some research on various derivatives. They've synthesized most of them, I think, biocystin, norpsilocin, norbiocystin, and they've been looking at whether they have any effect in isolation. The results have been a bit mixed. I think biocystin is not shown to be active at the 5-HT2A. Norpsilocin also not active in vivo, but not active in vivo, but they think it's because of the enzymes breaking it down before it has a chance to cross the blood-brain barrier. So it may be that the MAOIs would have some impact on this.
Mm-hmm.
They did do other tests with it, and it's shown in other tests to be as active as psilocin as an agonist rather. So it's sort of early days, I think, in terms of the research. It's very interesting, and I think there's a lot to be understood still. Some of these derivatives were only discovered last 4 or 5 years, I think.
Yeah.
And there's other compounds presumably in there that are not known. So it's certainly worth pursuing to see how they may play a role. Others are skeptical. I think if you talk to David Nichols, he doesn't believe there's really much of any of an entourage effect to be found.
Are we going to have some difficulty with the disparity between the findings that we get from in vivo and in vitro findings? So, for example, we spoke about psilocybin, right, and their deuterated form of psilocybin, where they have a heavy form of hydrogen, and it appears to have different effects whether you do it on a lab bench or in animals. Mm-hmm. Is this going to be a problem for the industry?
I mean, if those benefits, what's really important is in vivo results, right? If those benefits can be replicated in people, then I don't think it's a problem. I mean, deuteration is a very common pharmaceutical technique to either, controversially maybe get patentability, but also maybe to have some kind of functional benefit. And so I guess that, yeah, if those benefits can be proven in humans, then yeah, sure, why not?
Do you want to add anything?
No, these guys, they've covered everything.
What do you think are going to be the biggest challenges for the industry at the moment? So, I mentioned there may be the possibility of some kind of Supreme Court decision on shutting down patent applications, or there's a lot going on, and there has been some tanking of some companies in the stock market. What is going to be the biggest barrier to all of you moving forward?
I think access to capital is going to be a challenge for a lot of companies. A year, 18 months ago, it was a half-baked business plan and a fancy website raised you an unlimited amount of money. I mean, prove me wrong. And so now it's a period of companies trying to figure out what works, what doesn't work. Yeah. And the tide's going out, and we'll see who's wearing shorts or not, I guess.
I mean, are there going to be any Elizabeth Holmeses? Is there going to be any example, like any psychedelic equivalent of Theranos? Like, for the record, by the way, my background is in biology. That is what impresses me. When people come to me and say, look at our stock market valuation, I'm not impressed. Like, it is very easy to raise money when you're lying. And
Do you want to share your philosophy of...
Thank you. Are we going to see the psychedelic equivalent of Elizabeth Holmes, right? Somebody in handcuffs being made a fool of because they lied.
I mean, I could raise unlimited money if I forged a letter on Pfizer letterhead too, right? Saying my thing was really, really good. I wouldn't want to cast such aspersions as we have criminals in the ranks, but I doubt it.
Do you want my lawyer?
What, is he a criminal?
No, he'll just defend you for speaking the truth. It's called defensive libel.
I think we can, all we can do is look after our own patch.
Look after
and
our own patch.
if we can,
So you're taking a very Candide approach.
if we can look at ourselves in the mirror every morning and be satisfied that we're being open and honest with our investors, we're providing the evidence-based outcomes from our research, we're progressing to a point where we're realising those better outcomes for sufferers of mental health, then I think within the first 2 minutes of us talking yesterday, Zoe, you'd said that your premise is that anyone you're talking to in the first instance is lying to you.
I did not say that. I said the job of a journalist is to assume they're lying to you.
So it was, so it's an intimidating start to the discussion. But I think
I'm doing you a favor. I'm encouraging you to speak the truth and not have your head on a platter with your investors calling for your guts.
And I think that's again, you asked about our investor community. We're in the development stage of 2 phase 2 clinical trials. We've shared an enormous amount of information with them on our phase 1 trial, and that's all we can do. I think is be open and transparent on that basis. As I said, we're not out there raising tens of millions of dollars, and we're very deliberate about our raising of funds and how we utilise those funds.
So we need to wrap up. Do either of you want to have some closing remarks? No? Come on, Ben, you've been pretty chatty.
It might sound a little bit kumbaya, but it's unfortunately
That's such a Canadian thing to say, by the way.
I know, eh? Unfortunately, the market that we're trying to address is a very, very, very big one, and that means that there's going to be room for a lot of different approaches, synthetic, natural, big, small, whatever it is. And I think one of the good things about the kind of market downturn is it's forced people to...
Well, also seeing some, sorry, I won't make a joke. Seeing some horrible people lose a lot of money is not something I don't dislike.
Well, especially when they try to participate in like a kind of a pump and dump scheme in the first place, right? It's hard to feel sorry for them. But what you are seeing is companies, I think, starting to work together a little bit more, focus their business model, do what they do best, leave other things to other people. So hopefully we'll see kind of maturing of everybody in the industry.
I think that's a very good note to end on, the maturing of the industry. Guys, thank you very much. All right.